They don't like me, I'ma live my life anyway. I ain't fucking with her if she ain't watching anime. You know the finest women in the world, you know they cosplay. Pocket full of money, yeah, yeah. Man, I came to play, yeah, yeah. Drop top, yeah, yeah. Drop top, yeah, yeah. All summer, yeah, yeah. I won't stop, yeah, yeah. Beat going crazy, it's a whole box.
If you don't know, I made a video the other day saying that I agreed that Steve Rogers lost a lot when it came to Natasha. He lost his work wife, he lost his best friend, he lost um, like half of himself. I'm pretty sure that's what that post said. And I was saying in that video that whenever we talk about the death of Natasha, everybody goes automatically to Clint and Bruce Banner. And the Bruce Banner one, I don't understand, and I never will, because her and Bruce Banner had a connection over one thing, but they never really built on it. Their relationship seemed really forced, and it just really didn't make any sense for the two of them to be the two of them. And like even when we see them kind of like flirting together during Age of Ultron, after all of that stuff happens, after everything that happens, he up and leaves. Like he just leaves. It doesn't matter what's going on between him and Natasha. He literally is just gone. So it was kind of like there wasn't really a relationship between the two of them like that for them to be like, oh, Natasha and Bruce Banner, like, they deserve their happily ever after. Like, where are you getting that type thing from, right? And so when Natasha died in Endgame, you could feel everybody's like hurt and anger, but nobody talks about how it affected Steve. And that is the part that always confuses me because they have literally lived and breathed each other since uh, Winter Soldier, when they actually started bonding. Because they were together for Avengers, obviously. Like that's when they first get introduced together. But like after that, when you hit Winter Soldier, is when their bond starts to tighten. And like, hello. Um, And every movie that there is that involves the two of them, they always end up being together. So Winter Soldier, they were together at the start of um, Civil War. They are together. She splits from them to kind of team up with Iron Man due to the Accords, but literally ends up letting herself get put into exile or putting herself into exile to help Steve so that he can help Bucky. And then they still end up being together. And then after that, the next thing they're in together, I think, is in Infinity War, and that's when they're in Wakanda together. And then in Endgame, after the snap, those two didn't get snapped. Her, Clint, and Steve. Tony wasn't there, so Tony doesn't matter. They didn't get snapped. So for 5 years, it was just them. And then Clint went to go do his brother. And like I said, her and Clint are A1 since day one. But Clint was out there killing the Japanese and left her by herself because he lost his family, which is understandable. But Natasha's your family too. But he was too focused on whatever the fuck, and he was upset. He was angry, which still also makes sense. But she was still with Steve, and so I made a statement in that video that I was talking about where I said that Natasha was to Steve Rogers what Peggy Carter wanted to be. Oh, I'm sorry. um, and it's basically like when I say that, it's basically when I say that, it's like if you watch Agent Carter, Agent Carter or Peggy went through her little phase where she missed Steve, and there was like a lot of things going on and things that reminded her of Steve. Okay, so she was unhappy, but then what she wanted with Steve, she ended up getting it in somebody else. She got married, and I do believe that she had kids. When it comes to Natasha, Natasha bonded with Bruce Banner over the fact that neither one of them can have kids. But we also question mark don't know if Steve can have kids. So she could have also made that bond with Steve at some point. That was probably a conversation that they may have had sometime later, right? Um, because they've had all of this time to get to know each other. And when we're seeing after Natasha died in Endgame, there's two different emotions going on between 5 people. Thor, Steve, everybody. I don't go live very often, honestly. I'd be tired. Um, Thor, uh, what the hell is his name? Tony and Bruce are obviously angry because Bruce threw the bench. I finally figured out who threw the bench. Bruce threw the bench. So Bruce is obviously pissed, right? Those three are angry. But then you have Clint, who is not only angry, but he's hurt because she is like his sibling, basically. Like I said, they've been like this. So that's like, he just lost his sister, basically. And so he is hurt. But then Steve is the only one that's actually sitting there fucking crying because it was almost like he just lost Peggy Carter all over again in a situation that he could not have any control over. He didn't really have any control over the situation that happened in Captain America First Avenger, where he flew the ship into the ocean. He didn't really have a choice there. That was not in his control. He did the best he did. So that's when he lost Peggy the first time. And then, of course, he's unfrozen. Peggy's old as fuck. And then Peggy dies. But, I mean, he was hurt, but he knew that she was kind of happy. So I don't think that I think it hurt him, but it didn't hurt him as much because he still had Nat. And losing Natasha, just you can see it on his face. And then he couldn't even get her back. Like when people were, trying to, like when they snapped people back. Right. He didn't get any time with Peggy. So it's like what she wanted, and when you watch not Captain Carter, when you watch Agent Carter, she kind of has like these moments where she's wishing she was with him and that they had more time together, and you can tell like the things that she was looking for, things that she saw in Captain America or Steve Rogers in other people, and she found those qualities in the detective that she ended up being with. And so the difference between the difference between Natasha and Peggy is that he wasn't in love with Natasha. They were like this, but he wasn't in love with Natasha. He was in love with Peggy. And so now that he no longer has Natasha in this timeline, now this is my headcanon, and I actually have seen people who agree who have said the exact same thing. He doesn't have Natasha in this timeline anymore. You cannot get her back. Once she sacrificed herself for the fucking soul gem, you cannot get her back. You don't have Natasha in this timeline anymore. And so what do? You can't go back to a timeline where she's there because you're also there. But you can go back to a timeline where you're not. So he goes back to a timeline where he gets Peggy. Only because he doesn't have anything in this timeline besides Bucky and Sam. But like Natasha was more to him than what Bucky and Sam were. And I say that that's a big statement because Bucky is his brother. But he did years without Bucky. And, he was fine without Bucky. He was happy to have Bucky back, Like, that's my brother. Of course I'm happy to have him back. We got that mind control bullshit's broken. I'm happy to have you back, but I can be without you. Sam was his best friend, and so was Tony. Tony was also his best friend. So he had Sam and Tony as best friends, but he could live without either of those two people. Nat meant so much more than they did, and he didn't have her anymore. So he left. Because why stay in a timeline where you're gonna just end up by yourself? And I feel for him, and I wish people like understood that losing Natasha affected Steve more than it affected everybody else because everybody else had somebody. Um, I guess the only one who could match Steve's feelings of being alone is Wanda, which is why she turned out the way that she did. Because not only did she lose her brother, she lost Natasha, who was like an older sister as well. So it affected her too, losing Natasha. Um, I'm sure they told her, hey, Natasha died, type shit. So she has now lost like an older sister because Wanda was still young as fuck. And then, of course, she didn't have Vision anymore. And she didn't have Tony either. And even though Tony was like an ass, um, Tony was Tony and Steve were kind of like surrogate father type things. And but I just don't think Steve could have functioned as that for her without Natasha. So I think Steve's functionality was just entirely fucked up with the death of Natasha. Because with the death of Natasha came the death of Steve Rogers. And I've always felt bad. It's like I feel bad for him, and like I really can't feel bad for anybody else. Like I feel bad for Clint because that was his best friend slash sister, and they are bonded long ass time ago. They're like this A1 since day one, and you know they're always together. But he also had a family that he could go back to. Would he miss Nat? Yes. But he also has a child coming in, like, that has Nat's part of Nat's name, as well as Pietro's name. So, like, he has those memories of her. He can live without her because he still has a family. Steve could not do that. And that's why I think everybody kind of just glosses over it, but they fail to realize how much time Nat and Steve really spent together. Because it was a lot. It was a lot of fucking time. I don't know. I felt so bad. I really do. I feel so bad for Steve. And I honestly want to say Peggy was a last resort because who knows? I don't think that having Peggy would have helped him get over it. Honestly, because like I said, I feel like going back to Peggy was a last resort. I don't have anything else. So I'm just gonna go back to Peggy. That's literally what that feels like when you're looking at it from the big scope of everything that happened between him and that. I don't have anything else. So I'm gonna go back to Peggy. And then he got to spend that time with Peggy and be with Peggy and have Peggy and all that stuff. So he may have gotten the happiness with Peggy that he actually wanted with Peggy, but I just think that he would not have had because he would still remember Natasha. I do not think that he would have had that bond that he had with Natasha with Peggy. There's no way, in my opinion. I don't think that that would have happened. I think he would have had like a completely separate relationship with Peggy than he would have with Nat. And people were saying that Nat would have respected the fact, like if Nat were still alive, she would have respected the fact that he wanted to go back to Peggy. Are we sure about that? Because I really don't think that that would have happened. I do not think that if Natasha had survived that and lost Clint, like if we had lost Clint instead and Natasha had survived that, I do not think that Steve Rogers would have went back to Peggy. I do not think that at all. Because why? She lived a full life with somebody, had kids with somebody, and was very happy. And then he would still have Natasha, who was basically everything. And that was the only difference between the two, was that he wasn't in love with Natasha. But I think that if Natasha were still alive, that they probably would have been a thing. Um, the shield given to Sam. I think I made a video about it a long time ago, about which shield that is. It's the second one. He went back and got that one. So when he went back in time to put the stones back and ended up staying with Peggy, that it's that one that he brought from a different timeline, because the one that he had was broken. So he just pulled up another one. At least that's what it says on the Marvel website when it comes to the shield that Sam's got. So the shield that Sam has is the one that he went to a different timeline to pick up. That's really all I had to say. That was my deep dive for Natasha and Captain America. Just because some people wanted me to go a little bit more in depth when it came to Natasha and Captain America and why I said what I said. And that's basically why I said what I said. Because I really, honestly, and truly feel that way. I feel like if he still had Natasha, he would not have gone anywhere. There would be no reason for him to, because he would have had everything that he wanted in Natasha, then and there. He wouldn't have had to go to a different timeline. He wouldn't have had to do none of that. But because he didn't, what's the point in staying? So he left. And he really didn't have that much of a, because somebody also mentioned Sharon. He had like a flirtatious thing going on with Sharon, and then he like kissed her, but there wasn't really like a relationship there. So him staying for Sharon would not really have made any sense. And they really didn't have a bond. And she was more job oriented, and then like turns out she's like a fucking bad guy for Falcon and Winter Soldier. So it's like she would have been more job focused and not relationship focused. I think I think at that point he was just kind of a fling, and she was like a flirtatious thing, and she didn't really mean anything. But yeah, that was my deep dive, my very quick deep dive into Captain America and Natasha. I will go live again. This is going on the YouTube channel, so if you don't follow or subscribe to Nerd on the Street, please do. Nerd on the Street on YouTube, and then the podcast will be coming out. I know we're like 3 weeks behind on the podcast, but we have a really great episode coming out on Thursday for the podcast. And if you missed this live, you can capture it. If you missed this live about Captain America and Natasha, it'll be on YouTube like tomorrow. But it's almost 10:30 and I'm sleepy, so bye.